Is a merciful lie better than a devastating truth? One detective believed it was, so he faked an entire cold case to bring peace to a grieving family. But when the real victim's car was unearthed 27 years later, the truth that came out was far more terrifying than the lie he created. Some mysteries never let go. They sink their claws deep into a community and refuse to release their grip, becoming less a case file and more a part of the local weather. In the small, fog-shrouded town of Havenwood, nestled in the quiet valleys of northern Pennsylvania, that mystery had a name: the Millers. In 1993, the town lost a family. Not in a crash, not to a sickness, but to the air itself. David Miller, a quiet man who ran the local hardware store, his wife, Sarah, a kindergarten teacher with a smile that could coax the sun from behind the persistent clouds, and their 7-year-old daughter, Lily, drove their station wagon down a familiar country road for a picnic by the creek. And they were never seen again. Their car, their belongings, their very existence seemed to have been erased from the world. There was no scream, no sign of struggle, no sound, just gone. Witnesses were non-existent on the lonely stretch of asphalt that ran alongside the whispering pines. The initial search was frantic, a flurry of police activity and worried townsfolk combing the dense woods, their flashlights cutting useless beams into the thick, damp air. But the forest gave nothing back. It was as if the earth had simply swallowed them whole, leaving behind nothing but a question mark hanging in the mist. The case file, opened by a young, determined detective named Liam Keller, grew thick with dead-end leads and the ghosts of unanswered questions before gathering dust in the archives. No ransom note, no signs of a life abandoned, no disgruntled employees or secret enemies, just silence. For nearly 3 decades, the Millers family's disappearance became a piece of Havenwood's folklore, a ghost story told to children to keep them from wandering too far into the trees. It was a wound that never truly closed, a persistent ache in the town's collective memory. The case faded into local lore, another tragic mystery swallowed by the forest. The silence that began that September evening would become the most haunting sound the county had ever known, a sound that settled into the town's very bones. It was a question that the cold, misty air stubbornly refused to answer. What happened to the Millers? And more chillingly, was the forest finished with its secrets, or was it just waiting? Every cold case has its keeper, a solitary sentinel standing guard over a memory that the world has allowed to fade. While a town learns to live with a mystery, to fold it into its history like a troubling but distant memory, there is always one person for whom the case never goes cold. For them, it is a wound that bleeds fresh every single morning. For the Miller family, that keeper was Sarah's younger sister, Evelyn Reed. While Havenwood absorbed the tragedy, Evelyn could not. She became a woman living a life suspended in time, a ghost in her own home. For 27 years, her house on the edge of town became a quiet shrine to her lost family. She maintained Lily's bedroom exactly as it was on that September day in 1993. The bed was always made, a small flowered quilt pulled tight over a mattress that held no warmth. Dust floated in the sunbeams like snow caught in a photograph, and Evelyn would gently wipe it from the surfaces of small painted horses and a row of porcelain dolls with unblinking eyes. This room was not a memorial. It was a promise that Lily would have a place to return to. Her rituals extended beyond the 4 walls of her home. Long after the official efforts were abandoned, Evelyn walked the search grids herself. In the spring, she would push through new thorns and mud. In the autumn, her boots would trace the same mournful paths through a carpet of dying leaves. She knew the woods as well as any forester, not by their trails, but by their silences, by the places that felt emptier than others. Season after season, she walked until the earth offered nothing but its own quiet indifference. She became a familiar, spectral presence at the county sheriff's office. She never raised her voice. She never made demands. She would simply appear once a month, a quiet reminder to a succession of lawmen that a promise to find answers had been made and broken. Evelyn's grief was not loud or performative. It was a deep, unyielding pressure, the kind that reshapes a life from the inside out. Psychologists who study what is known as ambiguous loss call it the most stressful kind of grief. It is a loss without closure, without the certainty of death that allows the mourning process to begin. For Evelyn, her family existed in a state of permanent limbo, neither alive nor dead, simply gone. She was frozen in the moment of their disappearance, unable to move forward, unwilling to let go. She was the unwavering seeker, the last person on earth holding a candle against the encroaching darkness. She was waiting for a truth that, with each passing year, with each new sheriff who offered her a sad, sympathetic smile, felt more and more impossible to find. Every answer was like a knife made of fog. She could feel the edge, but never see the blade. Years bleed into decades. A case doesn't just go cold, it freezes solid, encased in layers of new tragedies, bureaucratic indifference, and the slow erosion of memory. The public's attention span is finite. New horrors eclipse old ones. The machine of justice, burdened by the immediate and the urgent, rarely has the resources to look back. This is the cold years phase. It's a period defined not by action, but by its crushing absence. Detective Liam Keller, the young officer who first took the case, was no longer young. He retired after 30 years on the force with the Miller file weighing on his conscience like a stone. On his first meeting with Evelyn Reed in 1993, he had promised her he would find her family. It was a vow made with the naive certainty of youth, a belief that good intentions and hard work could conquer any darkness. That failure followed him, a shadow in the quiet afternoons of his retirement. He'd see a station wagon like the Millers, and his breath would catch. He'd see a little girl with blonde hair like Lily's, and have to look away. The promise he had made to Evelyn had become a ghost that haunted him more than any other case. The file itself was officially passed on, but it was practically forgotten. A 3-decade-old ghost in the county archives. A new generation of detectives had their own caseloads, their own promises to keep. Any physical evidence from the initial search had long since been lost or deteriorated beyond use. Potential witnesses, if they ever existed, had moved away or passed on, their memories now as irretrievable as the Millers themselves. The trail was not just cold, it was extinct. The silence that began that September evening had become the most haunting sound in Havenwood. It was a silence that spoke of systemic failure, of a landscape that could swallow secrets whole, and of the profound, aching void left behind when hope finally begins to die. It's a phenomenon seen in countless rural cold cases, where the insular nature of a small town and the vast, unwatching wilderness conspire to keep secrets buried. For Evelyn, this silence was a physical presence. It sat with her at the dinner table. It lay beside her in bed at night. The hope she held onto was no longer a bright flame, but a single stubborn ember, glowing faintly in an overwhelming darkness, waiting for a breath of air that seemed like it would never come. And what happens when a person has to live with that kind of silence for so long? Does the need for an answer, any answer, become more important than the truth itself? The truth has a way of rising to the surface even after decades buried in silence. Hope, even when it is all but extinguished, can be reignited by the smallest, most accidental spark. It rarely comes from an organized search. More often, it comes from an ordinary person in an ordinary moment stumbling upon something extraordinary. In the autumn of 2020, 27 years after the Millers vanished, 2 college students were hiking far off trail near the Tumble Creek Reservoir, miles from where the family was last seen. They were looking for a rumored waterfall, pushing through thick underbrush when one of them slipped on the muddy bank. His hand went out to steady himself and closed around something hard and square. It was a metal lockbox, rusted nearly shut, half buried in the damp earth. Curiosity got the better of them. With a pry bar from their car, they forced it open. The contents were mostly a soupy, unrecognizable mess, destroyed by decades of moisture. But 2 items had survived the relentless passage of time. The first was a man's simple gold wedding band, its shine long gone, but its form unmistakable. The second was a tattered, laminated map of the county's old logging trails from the early 90s, a network of forgotten roads now almost entirely reclaimed by the forest. The discovery was small, almost insignificant: a wedding ring with no inscription, a decayed map of a place that barely existed anymore. But it was something. It was the first new piece of potential evidence in 27 years. The news, initially just a local curiosity, eventually reached the quiet home of retired detective Liam Keller, pulling him back into the orbit of the case that had defined his career and his greatest regret. He saw the story on the evening news and felt a familiar, unwelcome jolt. And he knew with absolute certainty that Evelyn Reed had seen it too. He saw the news rekindle a dangerous, fragile hope in her tired eyes. When she called him that night, her voice trembling for the first time in years, he felt the immense, suffocating weight of her expectation settle upon him once more. The ember she had protected for so long had just received a breath of air. Now it threatened to either burst into flame or be extinguished forever, and the responsibility for which it would be fell squarely on him. The discovery of the lockbox did little to move the official investigation forward. To the current sheriff's department, the items were too generic, the location too remote from the original search area. Without more, it was just another strange footnote in a case full of them. The active investigation stalled before it ever truly began. But for Liam Keller, it was a personal summons. Driven by a decades-old guilt, he unofficially took the lead. He retrieved his old case files from his basement, the brittle, yellowed paper smelling of time and regret. He spread the faded, water-damaged map from the lockbox across his dining room table and spent weeks poring over it, a magnifying glass in his hand, cross-referencing it with old case files and property records from the 90s. He felt he was chasing ghosts. Not just the ghosts of the Miller family, but the ghost of his younger self. The man who had stood in Evelyn Reed's living room and made a promise he couldn't keep. The past wasn't gone. It had just been quiet. And now, the lockbox had made it loud again. He met with Evelyn every few days, updating her on his non-existent progress. And in her face, he saw the profound, destructive toll of renewed hope mixed with decades of uncertainty. He began to truly understand that the not knowing was a unique form of torture, a wound that could never scar over because it was reopened every single day. One evening, staring at the cold caseboard he had recreated in his study, a dark thought, born of empathy and exhaustion, began to form in his mind. What if any answer was better than no answer at all? What if a conclusive story, a period at the end of a terrible sentence, was more important than the literal, unobtainable truth? He thought of the philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche's warning about gazing too long into an abyss. After 27 years of staring into the void of the Miller case, the void was starting to stare back, and it was whispering a dangerous idea. The moral lines he had lived by his entire career, the black and white code of a police officer, began to blur. They were softened by the persistent fog of his own failure and the desperate, heartbreaking hope of the woman he had sworn to help. He had whispered a promise to a ghost all those years ago. Now, he considered creating a ghost of his own to finally fulfill it. What if peace was a thing that could be built instead of found? Keller hit a wall. The map from the lockbox led nowhere. The ring had no inscriptions that could be traced. The official investigation, as he predicted, was already shelving the new evidence, classifying it as an anomaly. Staring at the cold caseboard in his study, surrounded by the smiling, frozen-in-time faces of the Miller family, Liam Keller made a decision. It was a choice that would violate every oath he had ever taken, a step off a cliff from which there was no return. It was not born of malice, but of a profound, misguided compassion. He began to construct a narrative. A story needs a villain, a ghost. Using his old contacts and his deep knowledge of regional cold cases, he found a perfect one. A violent transient and career criminal named Marcus Thorne. Thorne had a long rap sheet for robbery and assault across 3 states in the early 90s. Crucially, he had been killed in a bar fight in Texas in 1995. He was a monster who could no longer defend himself, a convenient repository for a crime he didn't commit. Keller began to weave the thread. Meticulously, expertly, he started building his fiction. He called an old informant, a man who owed him a significant debt, and coached him on a new memory. The memory of seeing a rusty pickup truck, just like Thorne's, parked on a secluded turnout near Havenwood in the fall of '93. He then used his old login credentials to access the county archives, subtly manipulating a digitized property log to suggest Thorne had been given a citation for illegally camping near the Tumble Creek Reservoir just weeks before the Millers disappeared. Each piece was small, circumstantial on its own, but together they began to form a picture. He created a plausible, tragic story of a robbery gone horribly wrong. Thorne, desperate for cash, targets the Miller family on a remote road. He takes what little they have, panics, and makes them disappear. The narrative explained the lockbox, the remote location, the lack of a body. It was a masterpiece of fiction, a story carved from the fog of the unknown. It was a truth made of paper and bone, but the bones belonged to the wrong man. Keller had built a case not on evidence, but on empathy. It was designed for an audience of one, with a single, desperate purpose: to give Evelyn Reed an ending. The story worked. Presented with Liam Keller's carefully planted evidence, the county sheriff officially closed the Miller case. The headline in the Havenwood Gazette read, "Justice after 27 years." Marcus Thorne was named the killer. For Havenwood, a ghost was finally laid to rest. The town breathed a collective sigh of relief. For Evelyn Reed, the news was a tectonic shift. The relief was palpable, a physical unburdening of a weight she had carried for nearly 3 decades. For the first time, she packed away the items in Lily's room, placing them carefully in boxes. She held a memorial at the local church. The community experienced a collective catharsis, a sense of justice served, however late. The wound that had festered for so long finally began to scar over. Healing, it seemed, had begun. But a lie, no matter how merciful, has no foundation. It is a structure built on air, and the earth gives back what it takes. As the town of Havenwood settled into its newfound peace, a different kind of truth was stirring. Miles away from the Tumble Creek Reservoir, a local construction firm won a bid to clear the long-abandoned black quarry for a new housing development. The quarry had been a place of local legend, a scar on the landscape that had been closed since the mid-90s. As their excavators began to tear into the earth, clawing away decades of overgrowth and debris, one of the operators, a man named George Harris, felt his machine strike something large and metallic deep beneath the ground. It wasn't the dull thud of rock. It was a hollow, resonant crunch. He stopped the machine, got out, and began to dig around the area with a shovel. First, he uncovered a rusted roof rack, then the curve of a fender. Within an hour, they had uncovered it completely. A 1988 Ford station wagon, its blue paint faded to a chalky gray, its tires long since disintegrated, buried 12 feet deep in the earth. It was a time capsule from a forgotten world. And its grave was unquiet. What the construction crew found buried 12 feet beneath the quarry floor shattered everything. It was a 1988 Ford station wagon, rusted but intact, the passenger side window spiderwebbed with a single ancient crack. Inside, forensic investigators found what 27 years of searching never could: the skeletal remains of 3 people, an adult male in the driver's seat, an adult female beside him, and the small, heartbreakingly delicate bones of a child in the back. Dental records provided a swift, horrifying confirmation. They were David, Sarah, and Lily Miller. The truth was so much worse than the lie. The cause of death was not a robbery gone wrong. Forensic analysis determined it was carbon monoxide poisoning. The car's tailpipe had been deliberately blocked, and a crude hose routed into the vehicle through a hole punched in the floor pan. It wasn't a crime of opportunity committed by a desperate transient. This was a meticulous, intimate execution. A trap. The news fell upon Havenwood like an anvil. The fragile peace that Liam Keller had so carefully constructed evaporated in an instant. The closure the town had felt, the healing that had begun, was revealed to be a phantom, a story told to soothe a child, now exposed by the harsh light of day. For Evelyn Reed, the revelation was a second, more profound devastation. The relief on her face, which had only just begun to soften the lines of grief around her eyes, was replaced with a mask of confusion, then horror, then a new, more terrible betrayal. She had mourned her family, held a memorial, and begun to heal based on a fiction. Now, she had to start all over again, but this time, the ground beneath her had been poisoned. The case was no longer cold. It was blazing hot, and it was a homicide. A homicide that had been officially closed under false pretenses. The first silence that had haunted Havenwood for 27 years had been born of mystery. This second silence, the one that now descended upon the town, was born of a lie, and it was infinitely heavier. With the discovery of the car, the case was no longer a local matter. This time, the state police took the lead. And the case was assigned to a lead investigator who was the polar opposite of Liam Keller, Detective Isabel Reed. Detective Reed was a woman known for her cold, almost surgical precision and her utter lack of sentimentality. She carried herself with an unyielding stillness, her eyes missing nothing. She wasn't interested in Havenwood's folklore, the town's emotional wounds, or the delicate feelings of a grieving family. She was interested in the facts, and the facts were stark. The Miller family was found murdered in a place and a manner completely inconsistent with the official closed case file. This wasn't just a reopened homicide. This was potentially a conspiracy and a massive obstruction of justice. Her investigation immediately bifurcated, splitting into two distinct paths. One path led back to 1993 to the original crime scene at the quarry, a hunt for the real killer. The other, more pressing path led directly to 2020 and the fabricated resolution. Before she could find out who killed the Millers, she had to understand who buried the truth. Detective Reed began deconstructing Liam Keller's work, not as a fellow officer, but as a primary suspect. She moved with a quiet, relentless efficiency. She re-interviewed the informant who had remembered seeing Marcus Thorne's truck. Under the pressure of a state-level inquiry, the man's carefully coached memory crumbled in minutes. He confessed that Keller had fed him the story. She analyzed the digital logs for the county archives and found the timestamp of Keller's login, the exact moment the illegal camping citation had been fabricated and inserted into the record. She was unraveling his compassionate fiction thread by thread, exposing the framework of the lie. To Isabel Reed, Liam Keller's motive was irrelevant. The law did not account for good intentions when a felony had been committed. She was not hunting for the Miller's killer, not yet. First, she was hunting for the architect of the lie. And every piece of manufactured evidence, every coerced statement, every digital footprint pointed directly at the retired, respected, and heartbroken detective. While Detective Reed dissected Keller's fabrication, her team pursued the original crime. The Black Quarry, they learned, had been owned in 1993 by the Abernathy family. Old Mr. Abernathy, a beloved and gentle figure in town, had passed away years ago. But his son, a quiet, respected accountant named Daniel Abernathy, still lived in Havenwood. Daniel was the picture of small-town respectability. He sponsored the Little League team. He volunteered at the fire department's pancake breakfast. He was the man who served ice cream with a gentle smile at the annual town picnic. He was the last person anyone would ever suspect of anything. But forensics from the buried car yielded a single crucial clue: a partial fingerprint lifted from the inside of the rear passenger window, preserved by the airtight conditions of the impromptu tomb. The print was run through the system. It came back with a match. Daniel Abernathy. He was brought in for questioning. At first, he was calm, composed, helpful. But when Detective Reed presented him with the fingerprint evidence, the quiet accountant's placid exterior crumbled. It was like watching a dam break in slow motion. His confession was chilling in its banality. He had been having an affair with Sarah Miller. She was a bright spot in his otherwise predictable, passionless life. She had promised to leave her husband for him, to start a new life. But at the last moment, she had changed her mind. She couldn't do it. couldn't break up her family. When he pressed her, she threatened to expose the affair to his wife, his children, the entire town. His perfect, carefully constructed life was about to be annihilated. In a cold, calculated panic, he lured the entire family to the secluded quarry under the false pretense of showing David a plot of land for sale. Once there, he executed his plan with the meticulous precision of an accountant balancing a ledger. He murdered them all, not in a fit of rage, but to protect his reputation, to erase a problem. The revelation sent a shockwave through Havenwood. Monsters aren't just found in the dark woods or in the faces of strangers on the news. Sometimes they live next door. Sometimes they sponsor your kid's baseball team. Sometimes they are the man who serves you ice cream. The true killer was in custody. His confession signed. The monster's mask pulled away. But for Detective Isabel Reed, the case wasn't closed. There was still the matter of the lie. She drove to Liam Keller's quiet house on the edge of town, the one with the neatly kept garden. She confronted him in his study, the room where he had built his fiction. She laid out the evidence of his fabrication point by point, her voice calm, clinical, and devoid of judgment. The phone records to his informant, the digital timestamp from the archives, the impossible coincidences that were too neat for any real investigation. Cornered and disgraced, Keller did not deny it. There was no fight left in him. He seemed to shrink in his chair, a man hollowed out by his own good intentions. His confession was quiet, weary, and heartbreaking. He explained his motive, the promise he'd made to Evelyn all those years ago, the sight of her unending, ambiguous suffering. He described watching her hope fade year after year, and the terror he felt when the discovery of the lockbox reignited it, knowing it would likely lead to another dead end and another crushing disappointment. He had come to believe that a tangible end, even a false one, was more humane than an endless void of not knowing. "I didn't do it for me," he said, his voice heavy with the weight of his choice. "I did it for her. I wanted her to be able to sleep at night, just for one night." He had not obstructed justice to protect a killer. He had invented justice to comfort a victim. The act was illegal, a violation of his oath, a betrayal of the badge he had worn with honor for 30 years. But its heart was empathy. He was a good man who had committed a profound wrong for what he believed were the right reasons. His actions force us to confront a deeply uncomfortable question, one that the justice system has no framework for. When the truth is unattainable, and silence is a form of torture, is a merciful lie a betrayal, or is it an act of compassion? What is the greater crime? To leave a wound open forever, or to close it with a careful, deliberate falsehood? The truth, in its full and brutal entirety, was finally out, and it was a catastrophe. Daniel Abernathy, the man who served ice cream, was sentenced to 3 consecutive life terms without the possibility of parole. But this brought no comfort, no sense of victory. Justice had been served, but it had come late, carved from stone and sorrow. Evelyn Reed was now adrift in a sea of new and more complex horrors. She had not only lost her family to the quiet, unimaginable betrayal of a man she'd known her whole life, but she had also been lied to by the one person she had trusted to find them. Her grief, once a stable, defining feature of her life, a heavy but familiar coat she wore every day, was now twisted with the poison of a double betrayal. Who do you trust when the monster and the hero both fail you? The town of Havenwood itself was shattered. The story of Marcus Thorne, the monstrous outsider, had been a comfort. It allowed the town to believe that evil was something that came from outside their borders. But the truth, that the monster was one of their own, a man they had trusted and admired, was a poison that seeped into the very foundation of the community. Trust in their own history, in their own neighbors, and certainly in their own law enforcement was irrevocably broken. Liam Keller, once a respected detective, became a pariah. He was stripped of his pension and faced a battery of criminal charges for fabricating evidence and obstruction of justice. The merciful lie he had constructed to bring peace had acted like a dam, holding back the pain for a short time. But when the truth finally broke it, the resulting flood was more destructive than the original tragedy had ever been. It proved a terrifying lesson, one that runs counter to everything we want to believe about the noble quest for truth. Some truths are too heavy to bear, but the weight of a well-intentioned lie, when it collapses, is often heavier. It doesn't just reveal the original crime, it creates a second, more insidious one, victimizing everyone all over again. Some mysteries don't end with closure. They end with an answer that creates a scar deeper and more jagged than the original wound. The names of David, Sarah, and Lily Miller were no longer forgotten, no longer whispered only in the folklore of a wounded town. They were known. Their killer was identified, their final moments understood with chilling clarity. On paper, legal justice had been served. The case file was stamped closed, this time with the ink of truth. But there was no peace. Not for Evelyn, not for Havenwood, and certainly not for Liam Keller. The core mission of this work, the principle that guides every story we tell, has always been to find the truth, to make sure no name stays forgotten. It operates under the firm belief that the truth, no matter how painful, is a form of liberation. That answers, however horrifying, are better than the suffocating void of the unknown. But the story of Havenwood stands as a chilling monument to a difficult question. It forces us to wonder if our core belief is always right. What happens when the relentless pursuit of truth destroys the very people it's meant to save? What is the true nature of justice? Is it the cold, hard facts printed in a case file, an objective accounting of wrongs righted? Or is it the fragile, subjective peace in a grieving human heart? Liam Keller's lie gave Evelyn a year of peace she hadn't known in decades. The truth, when it finally arrived, gave her a lifetime of new horrors. We are left with a story where the hero and the monster are not who we thought they were, and where a good man's compassion led to a crime that shattered a community more completely than the original murder ever did. Some questions, like the fog that settles over the Pennsylvania hills, may never truly lift. And the most haunting question left lingering in the misty air of Havenwood is this: if you could choose, would you rather have a beautiful lie or a devastating truth? The case of Havenwood Creek leaves us with no easy answers. We have two men, one who killed a family to protect a lie, and one who created a lie to protect a family's peace. It forces us to ask what we truly seek in these stories. Is it just the facts, or is it a sense of closure, even if that closure is built on fragile ground? Let us know in the comments below. What do you believe was the greater tragedy in Havenwood, the original crime or the well-intentioned lie that followed? Thank you for watching Unfound. These stories are filled with complex questions, and your perspective is an important part of the conversation. Don't forget to subscribe to Unfound and hit the notification bell so you never miss a case. Together, we can make sure no story, no matter how difficult, stays forgotten.